Greetings. Welcome to Real Talk. I'm John. Some of you may be familiar with me from Reason with Rattigan, I Never Knew TV, and other such platforms. Before getting into stuff, I must thank Dr. Gordon for the opportunity of being on his platform. I'll use it to analyse ruinous JLP and PMP policies, discuss common sense alternatives and solutions, and call for some form of action plan because we cannot continue on the current trajectory. Look at energy. Jamaica has always had electricity rates amongst the highest in the world. However, solar has been producing the cheapest electricity for years, with the then Minister of Energy coming off the grid in 2012 and reporting that his sagacious investment would pay for itself in just 5 years. So why isn't Jamaica powered by renewable energy? Why did the government transition us from oil to natural gas and maintain astronomical electricity rates, which prevents manufacturing? We should be creating skilled jobs in solar-powered industries, not creating more minimum wage jobs in tourism and expanding call centres. Think about it. If there's no hurricane, which would recover quicker, manufacturing or tourism? The COVID bullshit proved that we must diversify the economy, but the opposite is happening. Tourism is expanding exponentially, and that is illogical. History tells us that tourism and call centres cannot generate the revenues needed to deliver decent budgets, and if they did, we would have roads and less poverty. Poverty is not natural. It is created, and without doubt, the current policies are perpetuating it. For instance, the vast majority of the 300,000 jobs in tourism do not pay a living wage. The country has been and continues to be terribly mismanaged by the JLP and the PMP. This presentation will provide evidence that the fiscal policy is destroying Jamaica and should be immediately challenged. However, according to the PM, such statements are misinformation, but you can decide.
Misinformation in the society is at a dangerous level.
The PM has been on the campaign trail for quite a while, and top of the JLP alleged accomplishments are an improving economy and excellent fiscal management. And no one, absolutely no one, is off limits to his campaign machinery, not even children.
At one point in time, 10 years ago, our debt to GDP was at 150%. You know what that means? The economic students inside here will immediately know what that means, right? Today, our debt to GDP ratio is somewhere in the region of about 78%. By the time we get to the next financial year, we will probably be about 74%. So I want you to understand the magnitude of what we have gone through just about 10 years ago. The country was really in a crisis. Through the sacrifice of your parents, who endured new taxation almost every year, no budget to repair roads, no budget to invest in healthcare, no budget to invest in public transportation, no budget to invest in garbage collection, no budget to build the auditorium that you're asking for. No budget to pay increased wages to our public servants.
Let's break down what he told the students. 10 years ago, the debt to GDP ratio was 150%. So the amount owed by Jamaica was 50% greater than how much the country was producing, that is, the gross domestic product, GDP. And this was extremely bad and had to be drastically reduced. Well, as you can see, according to the Ministry of Finance, back then the ratio was 132%, not 150%. The PM started his address with, "At one point in time," but it appears that once upon a time would have been better. Anyway, let's fact check with the World Bank's recent report about global indebtedness. Their international debt statistics hold data on over 120 countries. Here are the ratios between 2012 and 2022, and the data was last updated in December 2023. The ratio is highlighted in red. GNI is gross national income and is the equivalent of GDP. As you can see, 10 years ago, the ratio was 92.6%, not nowhere near 150%. So the amount we produced back then was actually more than what was owed, which is good. But Jamaica was labelled as heavily indebted and an immoral IMF program imposed on the people because of an alleged ratio of 150%. Why? In fact, the lowest ratio was back then in 2013. The highest was during the COVID-19 bullshit, but otherwise the ratio has averaged around 104%. And that is the polar opposite of the PM's claim that the ratio has been declining and is now 78%. He told the students about the sacrifices made to reduce the debt, which his administration claims is at an all-time low.
Our debt is at a 25-year low.
Clark continuously brags about its fiscal management and the low debt. However, the World Bank data tells a completely different story, and TVJ recently reported some of their findings.
As it relates to Jamaica, the World Bank says the country owed $17.6 billion last year. That's slightly lower than the 2021 figure of $17.8 billion.
TVJ did not analyse the numbers, so I will. Here is an expansion of the table in their report. It shows a debt on an upward trajectory. Upward, not downward, but upward. In fact, when the PM claimed the debt was at its highest, it was actually at its lowest. In 2013, it was almost $13 billion, but according to the Ministry of Finance, the debt was almost 20 trillion Jamaican dollars, and given that the exchange rate was $100 to $1 back then, the debt was around 20 billion US. That is a monumental $7 billion discrepancy. How can that be possible? From my understanding, the World Bank gets its data from the Ministry of Finance or the IMF, and the IMF gets its data from the Ministry of Finance. So the World Bank information comes either directly or indirectly from the Ministry of Finance. At the end of 2022, the World Bank reported a debt of almost 17.6 billion US. But as you can see, the Ministry of Finance reported that the debt was 2.2 trillion Jamaican dollars, which is around 14.5 billion US. So the World Bank figure is a massive $3 billion more than the Ministry of Finance's debt figure. What is going on? In 2013, we had a World Bank debt $7 billion lower than the Ministry of Finance's figure, and in 2022, we have a World Bank debt $3 billion higher. An explanation is desperately needed.
We don't need to go to the people with deception.
Are the people being deceived? Not by me. This is a presentation of data in the public domain. Every year, the RJR group has regurgitated the JLP and PMP mantra about falling debt, but their report included a table with a debt rising from 14.2 billion to 17.6 billion, and this didn't set off alarm bells. This is why folk turn to social media. And instead of addressing legitimate concerns, the PM tells the country that social media is awash with lies. But worse still, he is never challenged. The World Bank data shows a rise in debt, so it is blindingly obvious that an explanation is urgently required from Holness and Clark, and also from Golding, because he was front and centre of the 2013 discussions with the vampire IMF.
So I just parked my law practice, parked everything, and just went into that. And that was hard work in a way, because that IMF agreement that we had to get into was, I had to do a whole heap of things to meet those, the things we'd agreed to. And my responsibility then was I was in charge of legislation for the government. So a lot of the legislation that to do with finance and tax and the commercial side of things, customs, everything, I had to make sure it was done on time and delivered, so we were compliant with the IMF agreement.
The IMF agreement unleashed the severest austerity program in the universe. Pure evil was let loose on the people because of an alleged debt to GDP ratio of 150%. The PM told the students the sacrifices were made over the years to reduce debt, including increased taxation. No budget to invest in roads, transport centres, markets, proper solid waste management, education, healthcare, and much more. Why? Because that money was allegedly spent on debt reduction. So how much did we spend on a debt that appears to have increased by 4.7 billion US, from 12.9 billion to 17.6 billion in 10 years? Here are the numbers. A conservative estimate of 21.7 billion US was spent. So let me summarize. We owed 13 billion. Over 10 years we spent 22 billion to lower it, and the result was a debt of 18 billion. How the fuck is that possible? Make it make sense. The debt repayment figures in the table are referenced. For instance, the 2022 repayment of 308 billion was sourced from the Ministry of Finance's Citizens Guide. The numbers are not fabricated. We're forever told that the debt is decreasing, but it isn't. If we use the Ministry of Finance's local currency figures, the debt has increased 10%, from 2 trillion Jamaican dollars in 2013 to 2.2 trillion Jamaican dollars in 2022. And over $2.7 trillion was spent in the process. This is an unmitigated disaster. Under this IMF, JLP, PNP arrangement, the evidence suggests that forever, we'll be paying around 2 billion US every year to service debt. But the PM is extremely proud of his accomplishments.
Because we have built the economy on strong footing, putting in the necessary fiscal buffers, making sure that we manage expenditure, we have been able to reduce our debt servicing, so that we have more money to spend on the things that matter to you.
Does this look like good fiscal management? Does this look like a debt that is falling? The PM puffed out his chest to declare that debt servicing costs have decreased. Well, this year it will be 1.9 billion, or 27.5% of the inadequate budget. Does this look like anything to be proud of? The money that should be invested in the people is going into the pockets of loan sharks and will continue indefinitely if we do not act. Around $2 billion every year. Under the JLP and PNP, we've been exploited to the maximum. We must do something, so contact me. My details are in the description. I have a website, letsbuildabetterjamaica.com, and a YouTube channel of the same name. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Until next time.